Picture the end of a really grueling week. You are just totally running on fumes, and your cognitive reserves are essentially at zero.
We've all been there.
Right. And a mildly worded message from a coworker pops up on your screen. And your immediate unshakable conclusion is that it's a direct attack.
Oh, yeah, a total declaration of war.
Exactly. Or think about dropping a pen on the floor. Instead of just picking it up, it registers as this profound cosmic injustice. You just snap at the nearest person.
And then you apologize later, right? You say, oh, I was just in a bad mood, or I was just really tired.
Yeah, we treat it like it's a temporary failure of character. We use exhaustion as an excuse for poor behavior. But our synthesis of the sources today is going to completely challenge that fundamental assumption.
It really does.
We're doing a deep dive into whether poor decision-making and heightened aggression under fatigue are actually emotional failures or if they are purely structural phenomena.
The material we are analyzing today fundamentally reclassifies this universal experience.
It's fascinating. It really is. We are pulling heavily from a cognitive and philosophical framework known as reflective humanism, specifically a text designated as No.54. We've also got some complementary behavioral psychology studies on decision fatigue in the mix.
And the foundational thesis across all these texts is...
It's that fatigue doesn't just change the content of your thoughts. It doesn't just make you focus on negative things instead of positive things.
Right. It actively compresses the actual phase structure of your cognition.
Exactly. It destroys a critical resource that the authors call spare capacity. And once that capacity drops below a certain threshold, the actual architecture of your thinking physically and structurally changes.
Which perfectly explains the phenomenological symptoms described in Note 54. They map exactly onto those clinical studies of decision fatigue we looked at.
Yeah, when you reach a state of cognitive depletion, you exhibit highly specific behaviors.
The first one being a rapid descent into binary thinking.
Nuance is the absolute first casualty. Yes, suddenly every situation is categorized strictly as an absolute success or a catastrophic failure. There's no middle ground.
And the second symptom is what researchers term hostile interpretation.
Which is what we talked about with that text message.
Right, the tendency to read a completely neutral data point as an active threat.
You also see an overreaction to minor stimuli and a severely reduced future imagination.
That one is key. You literally lose the cognitive ability to project scenarios beyond the immediate, uncomfortable present moment.
But the natural human tendency is to moralize these symptoms. We judge ourselves so harshly.
We assume we're just inherently irritable or that we lack emotional control.
Yeah, we view it as a personality flaw that we need to fix. But the reflective humanism framework provides this critical paradigm shift.
It assures you that this is not your personality manifesting. What you're experiencing is a structural contraction.
The behavioral psychology papers in our stack refer to this state as computational scarcity.
It's just like algorithmic throttling in high-performance computing.
Yes, I love that analogy. When server load peaks to dangerous levels, a well-designed system doesn't just keep trying to process everything until it crashes.
No, it actively drops complex heuristic queries.
Right, it rolls off resource-heavy applications and defaults to simple binary true or false outputs just to maintain basic operational status.
And your human cognitive architecture is deploying the exact same triage protocols.
You aren't regressing into a worse version of yourself. Your brain is aggressively rationing the computational resources required to process nuance and empathy and long-term strategy.
The framework models this algorithmic triage through what they call the inner OS, or your operating system.
Can you walk us through that? The text maps out a multi-layered process for how the brain handles input right.
Yeah, it contrasts the fully charged state with the deeply fatigued state. In a normal rested state, the architecture supports a 5-stage flow.
Okay.
It begins with the input, so a stimulus, an event, a piece of information.
Like the ping of the text message.
Exactly. That stimulus triggers the second layer, which is the automatic reaction. This is your default instinctual neurological loop.
The limbic response. Immediate and totally unfiltered.
Right, but in a state of computational abundance, your inner OS does not stop there. It pushes the data to a third, highly energy-intensive layer called reflection.
Or what the authors term recursion.
Yes, recursion. This is the cognitive space where you observe your own reaction. You create a buffer to evaluate that instinct.
And then that reflection feeds into the fourth layer.
Integration, where the new information is cross-referenced against past memories, broader contexts, and your long-term goals.
And finally, the system outputs a considered judgment. So it goes input, reaction, reflection, integration, judgment.
That's a normal, healthy flow.
But the structural shift under fatigue is genuinely alarming because it bypasses the most critical human elements of that sequence.
When the brain reaches computational scarcity, the flow changes drastically.
You receive the input, you experience the automatic reaction.
And then
The system routes directly to judgment. The recursion layer entirely fails to launch.
the integration layer is skipped completely. The inner OS takes a massive structural shortcut because it just lacks the required energy to power those higher order cognitive layers.
So you operate purely on stimulus and immediate default reaction while operating under the illusion that you've made a reasoned judgment.
The reflective humanism text actually formalizes this structural collapse with an equation.
The formula of meaning.
Right. Meaning equals a function of RIP and C, written out as meaning equals F of RIPC.
It forces us to look at cognitive output, not as some kind of magic, but as the result of interacting variables. Let's break those down lightly.
So R stands for recursion depth. That's the extent to which the system can reflect upon its own processes.
And I represents interference density, which is the capacity for different ideas to interact and cross-pollinate.
P is phase denoting your current level of understanding, and C is the bedrock variable, spare capacity.
And the Japanese source notes provide a really vital translation for that C variable. They relate spare capacity to the concept of yohaku. Yohaku. Right. In traditional Japanese aesthetics, yohaku refers to the blank space or margin in a painting or a poem.
But it's not just empty space.
No, it's the active necessary room that allows the focal point to actually resonate. In cognitive terms, yohaku is the unallocated computational room in your mind where reflection, integration, and empathy actually execute.
The relationship between these variables perfectly explains the degradation of our thinking. When C,
Your spare capacity?
your yohaku. When that plummets R, your recursion depth collapses. The system deletes the blank space required to step back and observe its own operations.
And we also have to look at I, interference density.
Right. In a rested state, high interference density allows your brain to pull a lesson from a completely unrelated domain, say an experience you had traveling 5 years ago, and you apply it to a current conflict at work.
It's the root of all creative problem solving.
But when spare capacity drops the brain walls off those departments to save energy, interference density drops to 0.
You become entirely siloed in your thinking, which locks the system into what the authors call phase fixation.
The text argues that cognitive growth and meaning generation are not linear trajectories. They occur in distinct phases.
Right when the inner OS processes information through all 5 layers, including deep recursion and high interference density, the system eventually reaches a critical mass,
And executes a phase jump.
where scattered data points suddenly synthesize into a novel understanding. It's the classic paradigm shift, the aha moment.
But a phase jump is computationally expensive. Very expensive. When spare capacity is depleted, the system enters phase fixation.
The mind just loops endlessly on the exact same low-level defensive reaction.
It cannot synthesize the data into a higher understanding. You see this when someone is exhausted and ruminating over a perceived slight.
They recount the same details over and over, generating the exact same anger or anxiety each time.
Unable to step back and reevaluate the interaction from a broader perspective, they are functionally trapped in the basement of their own cognitive architecture.
And this structural breakdown forces a pretty profound reevaluation of our interpersonal dynamics. The reflective humanism text poses a striking question directly from the source material. It asks, does ethics distort too?
That's a huge question.
If our ability to process reality structurally contracts, it stands to reason that our moral frameworks are similarly compromised, right?
Absolutely. The text offers a definition of ethics that is purely structural. It defines ethics as the design of distance between the self and the world.
Distance. That makes so much sense.
Empathy, fairness, moral consideration, they all require a specific cognitive distance. You need enough unallocated space.
Enough yohaku.
Yes, enough yohaku between your own immediate impulses and the external stimulus to actually perceive the other person's context.
You need the capacity to model their internal state, which is a highly complex heuristic query.
And fatigue systematically destroys that distance.
The source material details 3 specific compressional distortions that occur when this ethical distance collapses. The first is logical compression.
This is the phenomenon where the individual's time horizon radically shrinks. Complex chains of cause and effect require massive working memory.
So when the server is throttling, the brain abandons long-term strategy and switches entirely into immediate pain avoidance.
The system prioritizes stopping the current discomfort immediately. regardless of the compounding negative consequences that will occur tomorrow or next year.
The second distortion is ethical compression, which is a direct result of that lost distance.
The inner OS shifts from an expansive empathetic view into a strict defense mode. Empathy requires projecting yourself into another's paradigm, which costs a lot of energy.
Defense mode is cheap.
Very cheap. It categorizes everyone external to the self as an antagonist or an obstacle.
The assumption of positive intent is totally replaced by the assumption of hostility, simply because hostility is a safer, more conservative computational bet when resources are critically low.
The third is decision distortion. The framework categorizes this as a shift between two modes of interaction: continuous generation and discontinuous collision.
A rested system operates in continuous generation mode. It asks clarifying questions. It tolerates ambiguity.
It engages in dialogue, allowing the interaction to generate new data and mutual understanding over time.
However, maintaining that open state is a huge energy drain. So under fatigue, the system forces a shift into discontinuous collision.
The objective is no longer understanding. The objective is termination.
The individual collides with the stimulus, whether it's a complex project requiring input or a partner just asking a simple question about dinner.
The response is blunt, forceful, and designed entirely to shut down the interaction and protect the remaining scraps of cognitive energy.
The person in collision mode is not trying to be malicious. They are literally executing a hard abort on incoming data.
Applying this structural lens completely alters how we view others. The empathy paradigm shift here is massive.
If we synthesize the reflective humanism framework with the behavioral data, we have to conclude that a vast percentage of interpersonal conflicts,
In marriages, in corporate environments, in public spaces,
they aren't born of inherent malice or fundamental character flaws. They are the inevitable result of two individuals with zero yohaku entering discontinuous collision.
neither system has the architectural capacity online to execute the recursion layer. There are just two compromised operating systems crashing into each other.
So how do we translate this into our daily lives? Understanding the mechanics of computational scarcity mandates a shift in how we manage our own behavior and interpret the behavior of others.
The text translates this intense structural analysis into a set of highly actionable protocols. It's effectively a defense manual for the compromised inner OS.
And the primary directive is straightforward, but we all ignore it constantly. Do not make major life or strategic decisions under the condition of fatigue.
The structural data proves that the system is glitching. If your logical time horizon is compressed and your processing is biologically chained to immediate pain avoidance, any decision generated in that state is fundamentally unreliable.
You are optimizing for the next 5 minutes at the expense of the next 5 years. The system requires a reboot before outputting strategic choices.
The secondary protocol addresses the internal experience of phase fixation. The text advises a suspension of harsh self-judgment during periods of low capacity.
Think about lying awake at 3 in the morning, relentlessly auditing every mistake you have ever made.
We've all been there too. But the reflective humanism framework instructs us to recognize that this internal audit is structurally invalid.
The brain is just looping.
It is attempting to resolve complex emotional data without the spare capacity required to execute a phase jump. You cannot achieve a compassionate or accurate, broader perspective in that state because the required hardware is offline.
And the third protocol extends that structural awareness outward to other people. We're instructed to reinterpret the aggression or bluntness of others through a fatigue hypothesis.
When a colleague delivers a sharp, uncharacteristic response, our default limbic reaction is to assume malice and initiate our own defense mode.
But the framework asks us to pause, assuming we have the capacity to do so, of course.
Right, and run the diagnostic. Is this individual acting out of genuine hostility, or are they experiencing computational scarcity?
Have their recursion layers collapsed? Are they initiating a discontinuous collision simply because their yohaku is entirely depleted?
Applying the fatigue hypothesis de-escalates the interaction immediately. It allows you to recognize a system failure rather than a personal attack.
You can opt to delay the interaction until both parties have rebooted their cognitive architecture rather than engaging in a destructive collision.
Which brings us to what the source text offers as its central axiom: a baseline defense against our own compromised processing. The golden rule is simply this: do not adopt tired thinking as truth.
Do not adopt tired thinking as truth. The thoughts experienced during a state of computational scarcity are real phenomena. The brain is genuinely generating that anxiety, that anger, that binary assessment. But they are not accurate reflections of reality.
They're artifacts of compression. Acknowledging that your own mind frequently acts as an unreliable narrator is a profound application of the recursion layer.
But the implications of Note 54 extend far beyond personal cognitive management.
The philosophical conclusion of the reflective humanism text actually demands that we scale this framework up to an institutional level.
If we accept the premise that a significant portion of our ethical failures, our aggressions, and our poor judgments are actually capacity failures, it fundamentally challenges how we design our societies and our organizations.
Historically, our approach to ethical or behavioral failures has centered on demanding greater willpower.
We construct these narratives that emphasize individual resilience, grit, and the moral imperative to simply be better under pressure.
Or alternatively, we build increasingly strict, punitive institutions. We design rigid compliance systems and harsh penalties.
Operating on the assumption that human beings will naturally default to selfish or malicious behavior unless they're tightly controlled and monitored.
But both of those historical approaches completely ignore the structural reality of the inner OS. Willpower is not a magical infinite resource. It is a byproduct of computational abundance.
And rigid institutions often increase the cognitive load, which just accelerates the depletion of spare capacity.
If ethics is truly the design of distance and cognitive distance requires the blank space of yuhaku, then our primary objective should not be engineering stronger willpower or stricter punishments.
The primary objective must be designing systems, workflows, and environments that fiercely protect human spare capacity.
We have to engineer the space for recursion because true ethical behavior and high-level problem solving cannot be forced through an exhausted system.
They must be facilitated by an environment that allows the human mind the unallocated room to reflect. Without that protected margin, we are structurally guaranteeing a society trapped in continuous collision mode.
The analysis of fatigue provides a mechanical understanding of our own limitations. It removes the moral weight from our moments of exhaustion and replaces it with a mandate for better structural design, both internally and externally.
This framework completely changes the metrics by which we measure a functional system. If spare capacity is the absolute biological foundation of our ability to be ethical, empathetic, and reflective human beings, we have to critically evaluate the environments we inhabit.
Absolutely.
Consider our modern hustle culture. It's an economic and social paradigm that explicitly demands we optimize every single waking second for maximum productivity and output. If this culture relentlessly eliminates the blank space in our schedules, filling every available margin with input content, and the demand for immediate reaction.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Are we structurally engineering ourselves to be less ethical? By deleting our yohaku in the pursuit of efficiency, are we actually deleting our very capacity for empathy? Think about that for a while. Guard your spare capacity until next time.